Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to get started. Thank you for those that were able to join us. So Gabby and I are excited to bring the conversation to you all today. And if you've been a part of our work, and if you have not, welcome. One team habit that we have as we enter conversations always is just hearing from you. So as we check in and engage in our conversation today, we would love to be able to hear from you. One, your name, district, and how you're feeling coming into today's webinar. Feel free to use these levels, so level 1 through 5, and letting us know how you're walking into today's conversation. I'm Kelly Free. I'm lucky to work alongside of Gabby in the New York region. And today we are excited to bring to you Terri, who serves as superintendent in Waterloo. So I'll give each of them an opportunity just to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started in today's conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name's Gabby Hewitt. I'm calling in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but I've been at Education Elements for the last 5 years now, just supporting districts across the country with thinking about strategy and change management work. So the topic today is really close to a lot of the efforts that we've been seeing. It just has a little bit of a more narrow focus. And a lot of my work now is really supporting districts in the New York State area. So we keep close tabs on some of the things that you all are dealing with and having to respond to. So talking about this idea of the state mandate with mascot changes was definitely one that we knew would resonate with several people on the call. We are so excited and honored to have Terri Bavis on. Dr. Bavis is the superintendent of the Waterloo Central School District in New York, and actually has just sort of gone through this entire process of changing their mascot and have probably dealt with all of the decisions that you all are sort of thinking about and reflecting on right now. So we're really going to center the Waterloo story because we know we can sort of share our perspective, but really what Terri has experienced will probably be the most helpful for you all to hear. So I'm going to pass it over to Terri. If there's anything else you want to add, we're so grateful to have you here today, Terri.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I started as Waterloo superintendent in 2016, and we started working with Education Elements a few months after that. So we've been partners with Education Elements, and they have helped us through many changes in our organization, and we're grateful for their partnership and constant support.
Thanks, Terri, so much for sharing. And we're going to dive into the conversation in a second and hear more about how they were able to do this work and are continuing to leverage it as a way to bring their community together. So with that, just wanted to give a little bit of context of who we are as an organization if you are not familiar with who we are. Gabby and I work for Education Elements and have had the opportunity to work with hundreds of districts over the past 11 years, from supporting districts with personalized learning to supporting them with their strategic plans or change management, as Gabby shared. In particular, our reach has been across the United States. We're almost in all 50 states, which is a big record to hit. And thinking more specifically in New York, our footprint really has been focused in on that strategic planning process, along with how we develop more classrooms that are more student-centered. So we work with over 50 school districts alongside of other regional organizations to be able to make this change. And again, I know that if you're on this call, you care about this work. And so we hope that today you hear a little bit more from a partner that has been with us for many years and has seen work shift within their organization in a positive light. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gabby to share what our objectives for our conversations is today.
So you can see our goals for the next hour are really on the left-hand side, and how we're going to break it down is on the right. You will, just by virtue of being a participant, get a copy of the slide deck after, so you'll have access to all of this. But when we're thinking about any form of change management, if you were to Google change management as a process, you'll get a lot of results back. And so we want to give you sort of a general framework for how you think about change management, no matter what process you subscribe to. And then we want to bring it to sort of this case study of how you would navigate something as big as an identity change process. Mascots are something that create a big sense of pride in a community. And so it's also something that's going to return a lot of different experiences and inputs and perspectives. So having a process of how you think about change management that sort of avoids common pitfalls is going to be really helpful to you. So that's really our goal on the left-hand side, to think about that framework and then also give you that case study of how Waterloo approached it. And then at the end, Terri has been gracious enough to sort of offer herself if there's questions that you have that might be helpful to sort of thought partner with a leader. Any questions that she is able to answer, she is happy to answer. But it'll hopefully help you think about how you might apply some of these principles into your own practice as well. All right, so I'm going to start you off with just a quote about this idea of change in general. It comes from an oldie but a goodie. This is a Socratic quote, and I'll give you a second to read through it. And I think the reason why we really like this one, especially when we're thinking about something as big as changing, a brand or an identity, is it's really easy to sort of respond over and over again to the resistance, right? So why do we not want to change our mascot, or what are ways that we can sort of hold true to our identity? But rather thinking about this as an opportunity, right? How can you use this to really rebrand and reignite some pride in your community in a way that feels really respectful to all of the nations sort of that your district serves? So I mentioned this earlier, but if you were to Google change management, you are going to get all the frameworks that exist. There's, hundreds of them. And so we pulled some of the most common ones, and we want to share some positives around how you could use this to think about change, but then also some pitfalls that might occur as you're going through a change management process in general. And in hearing the Waterloo story, you're going to see how they sort of navigated against those pitfalls. So Lewin's change management model is one of the most common ones, even if you've never heard of like that title. These categories of like, you want to start by evaluating what change you have to make. Then you're going to roll out the actual change, you're going to communicate it, and then you're going to incorporate those changes into the new status quo. This is a pretty typical change management process, right? Lewin's uses the analogy of unfreezing something, seeing a change in state, and then solidifying whatever that new state is. And it just becomes part of your standard operating procedure. So this is a really sort of simple way to think about change management, but we worry that one of the pitfalls is it almost oversimplifies change management, right? And so if we're thinking about that idea of like refreezing that status quo, it doesn't actually leave a lot of room to test things out in a small way, to really get some kind of community input. And so there's sort of a shortcoming with this change management model. The next one is also very common. This is called the Kubler-Ross Model. And this one is really around the experience of the person most impacted by change. So again, another common one that you might have seen before, and you'll see the two variables are sort of the energy and how it depletes or inspires or activates energy, and how that changes over time. So you might have experienced some of these emotions when you first heard about the mandate, whether it was a few years ago or this past year when it became a more formal mandate. There might have been some shock. Maybe some members of your community are feeling some level of denial or anger. As you go through this process, you might notice that people are really sad to sort of lose a part of what they feel like is true to their identity. And then at the end, you sort of get to this level of acceptance. So this is a change management model, is what we would call sort of like a psychological map. And all that means is it really shows you the experience of the person impacted by the change, but it doesn't actually help you think about how you navigate and respond to those experiences of the change. So all to know, but it again sort of falls short when you're thinking about a process as big as changing a mascot. And then the last change management model we want to show you is just the Cotter Model. This is the one that is probably most preferred by a lot of executives and superintendents that we've worked with, because it's pretty explicit in terms of steps that you can take to move from one sort of current state into the desired future state. And so again, if you haven't heard of this model, there's probably some steps there that feel very familiar to you anyway. So if you look at step one, right, there's some kind of urgent need for change. And typically as leaders, the way we react is we want to go ahead and put a team together. We might assemble a steering committee. We might get a representative group of people together. And then we move into step 3, where we're developing some vision and strategy. We're communicating it out. We're setting our goals. And then we're sort of moving into that freeze state in step 8, where we're making that change stick. And so this model is preferred because it does get you from point A to point B. It gets you thinking about how you can sort of change using a group of committed members to sort of navigate that change. But again, where this falls short is it doesn't leave a lot of room to continuously gather different feedback loops, right? To ask your community, what do you think about this? Here is where we are in the process. It sort of gives you the roadmap, and then you communicate at the end when you've already made all the changes. So what we really love about the Waterloo story is that you'll see each of these has a common pitfall in change management. And Terri and her team have really found a way to sort of avoid these different pitfalls. And Terri, I'm not going to assume that it was an easy process, but I do know that you all have been pretty diligent about communicating and involving as many people as possible through the process. So that first model, where it was sort of oversimplifying the change management process, Terri and her team and her board sort of knew this is a multi-year process that's going to happen. It's not going to be something we're going to cover in a single school year. That second pitfall of really empathizing or thinking about the user experience without having a next step or a way to use that data, Waterloo has been able to sort of take that empathy data and turn it into some choice sessions. And then they've also worked to be really inclusive, right? To not have that sort of top-down model that you saw in the third example, but to really implement the change as they went, while constantly keeping a lot of their community groups, but especially students, at the center. Okay. So we wanted to just start with giving you some examples of different change management processes. Again, these are all very common steps. But we want to really frame what you might sort of run into when it comes to implementing your own mascot change. So as you all know, we don't really have to tell you sort of what the mandate is now, but New York State for a few years now has been saying this is coming down the pipe. And most recently, they formalized a deadline for where impacted school districts will have to make some level of a change on their mascot. And there's really 3 options in talking to different leaders and superintendents that we've been hearing leaders are thinking about. And in just a second, I'm going to hand it over to Terri to sort of explain how Waterloo has navigated this, because they did consider all 3 of these options. But the first option is what we like to call the Washington football team option, right? So this is when, the Washington football team formerly had the mascot of the Redskins. They did make a move several years ago to remove Native American imagery, but instead of moving from one mascot to another, they just removed all of the Native American imagery without a rebrand, and basically said a rebrand is forthcoming. So there are likely some districts, and potentially some of you on this call, who might think that that is the right option for you right now, right? You're the only leader or team who can determine what's the right next step for you. And that potentially could work to satisfy whatever the mandate needs are right now, and also buy you some time to be able to really do a thoughtful process to change to a new mascot. So that's one option that we're seeing and hearing a lot of districts sort of consider. Another option is what we like to call sort of the Florida State Seminole option. Florida State as a university has a strong relationship with the Seminole Nation in Florida. And they ask and receive permission every single year from the Seminole Nation to continue using, Native American imagery that's very respectful of that tribe. They even go so far as to make sure that they actually have a member of the Seminole Nation present at their football games, so that they're not using an image of a mascot, but they're actually using a true representative from that nation. And again, this is an option that we've heard districts consider. Can we write a letter to the nation that whose land we sort of serve, and ask for permission to continue using their name or likeness or imagery? And again, we hear districts sort of navigating that. And then the third option, which you'll hear more about, is just sort of a full rebranding of the district mascot and logo. This is the most comprehensive option, but it's also the one that will sort of likely get you through an entire change management process without setting you up for other steps down the line. So Terri, I'd love to hear, I know in our conversations you shared that Waterloo had discussed and considered all of these options. So I'd love to hear about your experience and why you ultimately went with option 3, which was the full rebrand.
Our committee, our mascot change committee, was heavily populated by students. Our strategic plan, our mission is we put kids first every day. So the kids were really integral into the decision making of what we were going to change our mascot to. And some of the adults in the community were pretty unhappy about that. But it's like, well, this is their time in Waterloo. And honestly, we had been changing over slowly for about 4 years. When we ordered new uniforms, when we ordered new signage, our website, we had sort of redesigned and we were using a W instead of the Indian head. And so when we talked with the kids about, well, what do you think? Because we could have, that was one of the community suggestions is, well, can't we just not have a mascot for a while? Can't we just use the W? And the kids said, well, we don't want to be the W's. We want a fun costume we can dress up in. This is our high school time and we haven't been able to do this and it's been COVID. And so for many reasons, they really wanted that costume. So they didn't care if it was a tiger, a wolf, a bear, a whatever. They just wanted to have a costume to have fun with at pep rallies and athletic events and, the musical or wherever, opening days, assemblies. So that's how we arrived at not sticking with just we're Waterloo with, for however long people make the decision to change. I think the other piece that's important is our change process started with a strategic plan. So our first pillar in our strategic plan is safe space. And so when you talk about safe space, you have to talk about inclusivity. And therefore, it was very difficult for us to have a strategic plan that was adopted without talking about safe space in the mascot. So one of the action items in the strategic plan was that we were going to change the mascot. So the Board of Education adopted that the summer prior to us starting through the change of the mascot. So there wasn't a fight about the mascot change because the mascot had already inherently been changed. The board had approved the change. And so that sort of took the shock, anger, and denial out of everybody's sails. They sort of had to process that quickly and move on because we were changing it. That decision had already been made. And the reason the decision had been made is because we consulted an attorney, one of our attorneys from Harris Beach, who had gone through all the legislation. We knew with the pending legislation and the bill that had been introduced, it was a matter of time. And so we needed to hustle because we have a big Indian head in the middle of our turf that was going to cost quite a bit to get out. So it was going to require a capital project expenditure. So we had to be really planful about how we implemented the change and that we gave ourselves enough time to hit the 2024 deadline, which is where we ended up.
And Terri, I heard 2 things in that. One was communicating early and often that this is coming down the pipe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sort of trying to negate some of those feelings of shock and denial. I'm not going to be so naive to say that you didn't have any negative reactions. I'm sure you still had to navigate some of those, but you were at least trying to mitigate it by just being really upfront that this was happening. And the second piece was just really tying it back to your strategic goals. So I guess my question is, do you feel like in hindsight, is there anything else you would have done in the beginning to really set up your community to be ready for this change?
I don't know that there was an easy way to do it. We're in a small rural community. Many of the kids who go to school here have parents and grandparents who went to school here. So the Indian is steeped in tradition. It's part of the history. We had, Indians forever, tradition, honor, signs in front yards and all that. And I understand it's like, well, we're not saying that you still can't be the Indians. When you graduated, you were an Indian. But right now we have to change because we're being told we need to change. We're being asked to change. And I also have to keep driving home the point, this isn't new. This first memo came out in 2001. The district that I was in before I came to Waterloo made their change in 2003 from the Chiefs to the Patriots. So, I had to keep reminding people, like, this isn't like a rush job. It's just, some districts have sort of drug their feet on this and they don't want to change. And now we have a commissioner who's actively pursuing this change. So you can't ignore it anymore. So we were lucky that we had sort of started to shift over slowly. And I guess that would be my suggestion. That gave people time to sort of detach themselves, people who were involved in the schools, detach themselves from the Indian, because the Indian hadn't been seen in a while. And to move from the W, and then really it was at the urging of the kids to move to, what are we going to be next? And that was really where the kids got involved and surveyed, and they sent in suggestions and made videos about why they thought their mascot choice would be the best. And we had that on the website. We did a lot of PR. We have a part-time PR person through BOCES that was extremely helpful in navigating the change. And again, just being really transparent and sending it out in a newsletter and making sure, because we have a lot of people in the community that went here that don't necessarily check the website, or they don't have a child in school here. So that was a part of the community that we weren't reaching. So sending the website out, or sending the newsletter out, was really important.
Love that. We're going to come back to some of the communication strategies as well, Terri. Awesome. Well, so you heard a little bit about sort of how Waterloo navigated the entirety of the process, or really the decision to go to a full rebrand. We'll come back to really seeing the intentional steps that Terri and her team took to get them to being able to select the Tigers as their new mascot. But I want to quickly come back to some of the change management pitfalls that we highlighted earlier, and to share some of the solutions that, in hearing Waterloo's story and being a part of that story, we were able to pull out as sort of lessons that you could take back to your districts if you're considering this change on your own as well. So again, this idea of not oversimplifying a really complex and really maybe potentially triggering or emotional process. One of the solutions you can try is sort of what Terri said, like communicating that this will be a multi-step process, right? We've sort of gone back and looked at where Waterloo was a few years ago, but they just started with a strategic plan and created that and set the goal to really create these safe spaces and be really inclusive. That was step one. And then step two was sort of communicating that this change is coming. And then steps 3, 4, 5 was a lot of feedback, right? So surveys, communicating out the results of the surveys, keeping students at the center, having students be the ones who pitch sort of the final rebrand. But in general, just like communicating that we are going to do this in different steps, I think will also help your community to understand that the process isn't going to be immediate. It's going to be slow. It's going to honor tradition. It's going to move us forward, though. The second pitfall around empathizing without having an implementation plan, something that we've noticed in Waterloo's story, and a lot of you on this call I know are also involved in your own strategic planning process. This is a very similar trait as well to what we recommend in strategic planning, is just engaging with your community members. So whether that's surveys, focus groups, town halls, empathy interviews, whatever that thing is, just engaging with them, giving them a voice to be able to share. I heard Terri mention that she wasn't just engaging with, current parents of Waterloo students, but also former alumni who would just be taxpayers in the community now, but potentially had a tie into the previous mascot, right? So again, engaging with the community and then following up and saying, thanks for sharing your ideas. This is our next step, or this is how your ideas are being used. And the final pitfall, this idea of implementing without inclusion. One solution you could be thinking about is not just having one round of feedback, right? The districts that are engaging in either strategic planning or something as big as a mascot change, that just have one round of feedback, there's a shelf life for that data, right? So especially if you took that survey or had that survey at the end of last school year, there's a world where perceptions have changed. Kelly and I have worked with districts where their goals in 2019 looked very different than they did in the fall of 2020, right? So there are also external things that could happen that could sort of shift the priorities and needs of your community. So by ensuring that there's multiple rounds of feedback loops, it actually helps you to have really up-to-date data from all of your constituent and community groups. And then the other thing that is sort of like a part two to this idea of inclusion, the most impacted group that you're going to have, they might not even be the loudest voices, but the most impacted group at the end of the day is going to be your students, right? So making sure that they're very much at the center of this process. Everything we've heard about Waterloo is they were like pretty excited to have some input into what the new mascot's going to be. They're the ones who are going to wear it on their shirts, you know, on their jerseys. It's going to be on their diploma, right? So just really keeping them at the center of this change process as well. So we want to share and highlight a couple more things about Waterloo's story, and then we want to turn it over to you and sort of see what questions you have for Terri, or in general, even if it's not specific to Waterloo, you know, superintendent to superintendent, leader to leader. What questions would you have for her around how you might actually navigate this process? So I'm going to highlight a couple things, Terri, and then if there's anything that I missed, would love to give you a chance to maybe add some color to it as well. But this is just a visual of all the things that Terri shared as well. So summer 2021, Waterloo sort of launched their new strategic plan, and this was written into the strategic plan as a goal to create those really safe spaces and be really inclusive. Spring of 2022, this is just one example. I'm sure there were many iterations of newsletters that went out, both in email or digital form and in paper form in mailers. But Waterloo was really diligent about sharing out the timeline. So that first solution of communicating that it's a multi-step process. And so they shared, you know, you can see this spans 2 calendar years. They shared, we're going to form this committee. Our board is going to approve different things from the plan, including the adoption of a new mascot. We're going to create a subcommittee that's just focused on this mascot. And as you'll hear from Terri, that committee was really comprised of lots and lots of student voice. The mascot committee is going to be responsible for starting that community engagement through surveys. We'll review the survey data. We'll send out another survey. Here are the top choices that came back. And then we'll have our students sort of pitch the final 4, right? Like what mascots could we move forward with before we adopt a new mascot? And just in looking at all the resources that Waterloo shared, it was almost probably impossible to live in that community without knowing that we're in this stage of the process. So they did a lot of communicating out. Our rule of thumb is 3 times 3 different ways when it comes to any form of big communication. And all that means is whatever you're communicating, send it out 3 times. So 3 distinct moments, and try to use 3 different platforms to do so. So it could be a paper newsletter home, it could be your Twitter feed, it could be your district newsletter. But that way, no matter what communication platform your constituents use, they're able to access that information. And then you can see after lots of rounds of voting, they moved forward with the Waterloo Tigers. One thing that you might notice just in looking at this visual is there is a part of the identity that was the same. And Terri, I'm curious if that was really intentional. But in looking at some of the older newsletters, Waterloo communicated really early, we're going to keep the colors orange and black. So while the imagery itself is going to change, we're not going to lose this piece of our identity. And I think that was a really smart move because it doesn't, we're not going to purple and gold or something totally different. We are just sort of changing imagery in a way that really reflects our current values. I know there's some questions coming in. Before we get to those, Terri, would love to see if you could add some color to how you went through this process or anything else that you wanted to highlight about this as a goal of yours, the way you all communicated, or even that decision to keep at least a part of the identity the same.
One of the things we did was we went back to the alma mater. And the alma mater is sung at graduation, and it's sung at assemblies. The kids learn it in primary school. The alma mater does not reference the Indian. The alma mater references orange and black. And it was clear from early surveys, in addition to the alma mater, that we wanted to maintain the orange and black for many reasons, because this wasn't about changing for change's sake. It was about changing a mascot that we were being told by the state education department needed to be changed. So it wasn't something that we did without great thought, and we, certainly didn't do it quickly. It was truly a change process. But I think trying to hang on to whatever shreds you can of what was in the past will help you move to the future. And I don't think it's a terrible idea, honestly, to go without a mascot if that's what your community says until you're ready to make that jump. Our kids were specific. They wanted it. And so I took a lot of darts for that one because the people in the community did not want that. But it worked out okay. It wasn't easy. As you referenced, Gabby, there were some definite valleys and people were angry, and we just had to kind of steel ourselves and go through it.
Thanks, Terri, for sharing. You're alluding to the question that Patrick shared a little bit. I know that his district is in a similar process, focusing on that strategic plan now. But curious, one of Patrick's questions was just if you could identify one item that you would do over again, what would it be? I know sometimes prioritizing one can be hard, but would be curious to hear from you, Terri, now that you've been able to really reflect on the journey. What's one thing that you would consider doing differently if you were to do this again?
Well, it's probably not going to be very helpful to Patrick, but I would not have had my knee replaced because it took me out from November to March. So I lost a lot of momentum and time. I think it's really important to stay on top of it once you start it. So if you have people who want these community meetings or whatever, get into them, do them. Maybe you need more than one. One thing that I think was pivotal to the success of this was the decision was made really before the community even realized it. It wasn't intentional, but people weren't paying attention to the strategic plan necessarily. So that's why it was like the wind was taken out of people's sails who were angry once they realized, oh, well, this is already done. Like that decision had been made. We're changing. And I think that's really why it's helpful it was difficult because I went to the NCAI, I went to University of Buffalo Indigenous Peoples faculty. I went to Ainsley Jemison at Ganondagan. I wrote to the two legislators who introduced that bill, and I couldn't get anybody to come forward and sort of stand on the line and say, yes, this needs to happen. Everybody was a little bit wishy-washy because nobody wants to take that on the chin. So it was really, now at least you have to stand on. Betty Rosa has been pretty specific about the fact that this is going to happen. When we started this change process, it was a good possibility, and the introduction of the bill helped us, but it's still, people in my community were still saying, well, you're changing it for no reason because you don't have to right now, and this isn't a law, and you have a choice. And I said, well, we used to have a choice, but our board made the decision that we were changing. So I think just to keep the conversation moving and trying to keep it moving in a positive direction, really engaging the kids, I think, was key. And talking about how this is about the kids, that was the thing that I think helped us the most. But seriously, for me to be out from November, I was working remotely, but it's not the same as being in person and being visible in the community, like being out and about and talking with people. I didn't get to do that because I was out, because I didn't get to come back until March.
Wow. Yeah, Terri, that gets to one of the questions that we just heard in terms of, were there any specific conversations or strategies that helped you, especially when it comes to maintaining those productive conversations that can be challenging? So just curious to kind of hear how you navigated those conversations. You alluded to it a little bit that, people were upset, but what allowed you all to be able to be successful and leverage the student voices? What were some of your strategies you all leveraged?
Well, it was interesting because when we made all survey results public, like we didn't hide anything. There were some, I guess, responses that were inappropriate that we took out, of course, but the ones that were, appropriate for public consumption, we shared them all. So there was no mystery as to how we ended up where we ended up. It was really some people on the first survey, because we just threw it out there. What would you like the mascot name to be? And some people still put Indians, but 72% of people said something else. So we really stood on that fact. It's like, look, we sent this out to everybody that was interested. Anybody could have replied to this that lived in Waterloo. And we had over 1,000 responses, which in a small community is pretty good. So, you know, to have over 70% of those people say, I think we should be this, or I think we should be that, I thought was decent. So when we pulled those back in, we sent them back out based on the top 4, and that was the choice. That was the committee's decision to make that choice. And so then those 4 were sent back out again. And again, we had the student voice in there. There were a lot of community members that were angry that we allowed the students to vote. And I thought, well, why wouldn't the kids vote? It's their mascot. But that was the mindset that was going on at the time. But again, I think that was a vocal minority. I think for the most part, people were supportive, but you don't typically hear from the really supportive people. And there was a lot out there on social media that was not friendly. I mean, we just had to sort of, like I said, just keep moving forward with our process. We stuck to our timeline and we hit the deadline of the June board meeting with the presentation, and that was it. And then over the summer, we did the rebranding. So, you know, I think it's just being purposeful and direct that this is the process that we're following, and you don't get thrown off the track because people are upset, because people are going to be upset. You know, as somebody asked about sample surveys, I'm happy to share everything that we used. It wasn't anything fantastic. I mean, they were pretty simple questions and they were very short surveys, so it was easy for people to get through them. And you certainly can look on our website. Everything's on the website. So we kept everything extremely transparent and public. So there was absolutely no question of, you know, like I had some ulterior motive that I wanted to be the Tigers since I entered Waterloo in 2016. So it was, you know, just making sure that we had all the information out there, that it was easy to access, that it was easy to understand, and that we were really, like Gabby said, very transparent about the process. Anybody could have served on the mascot committee. We opened it up to anybody in the community, any student, any community member, staff member, whoever wanted to participate. There was no like limit on who we would involve. And so in the end, when people were grumpy about it, we said, well, did you get on the committee? No. Well, okay. Did you vote? No. So it's like, well, I can't control that part of it. You know, you have a responsibility to participate if you want to be part of the discussion and the decision.
Thanks, Terri. Thanks for sharing that. I think so often we can lose sight, or that emotional aspect takes over as we think about that change that happens. So appreciate you just sharing transparency and continuously coming back to your timeline and naming that like part of your role within the community is to make sure that this work gets done and gets done alongside the community. So appreciate you sharing that. I know one question that there's a 2-parter in that question, which was, it sounds like this district in particular has a mascot in mind with no alternative, but it goes well with what they currently have. If this was something that was presented to Waterloo, do you see anything that would be a problem if they didn't go through the process you did? So they have a mascot in mind, don't have an alternative. Is there any foreseen problem that they might run into based on your experience?
Well, it's hard for me to have a lens other than the community that I'm in. That would not play well here, I can tell you that. And if that was, I don't know who's got this mascot in mind, but I would probably put it out there as one of the options, but I wouldn't put it out as the only option. And then if that's what the community wants, that's what the community wants. You know, maybe there's a reason I don't understand why this alternative mascot was selected. But like I said, that's what it was hard for me when people said like I had, you know, this was my will, this was my opinion. It's like, I do not have a dog in this fight. I just need to get this work done. So that's why I would put that in as one of the choices, but I wouldn't not give our community a choice because that would not have gone well. I mean, it was hard anyway. If I would have said, sorry, this is what we're going to be now. We're going to be the Waterloo Wolves because that's the one I liked. You know, that I don't think that would have gone well, but every community is different, and I'm sure, you know, their process and their constituents, they're different than what we have here. So I would follow whatever you think is going to work in your community and, you know, what you think people will be happy with.
Thanks, Terri. I know one question that we got privately was just around, in particular, like what made you decide you needed a partner in this work? So Terri, you're kind of alluding to this a little bit around like, you know, you didn't want your name to say like, I wanted the wolves, but you really wanted to be sitting next to your community members and determining and hearing from them. What was your decision around like, I need a partner, and you chose us as the partner? What allowed you to feel really confident in bringing us alongside this process?
Well, I knew the mascot was going to be an issue. It was just a matter of when. You know, it was because once all the professional sports teams started changing their names, you know, it's going to trickle down, and it's just a matter of time before it gets to the schools. So at the time we were working with Baltazar Benavides, who was amazing and wonderful. And, you know, we've loved all of our partners, and we work with Colin Thompson and Selima now, they're wonderful. Dana Britt's fantastic. So we've always had really strong partnerships with Education Elements. So I felt really comfortable when our personalized learning work was sort of coming to, you know, as far as we thought we could push. And then we were in COVID, which was a disaster for, you know, so many reasons. I said to Baltazar, I said, you know, we really need to redo our strategic plan. We had tried to do it several times without success. We had gone with different agencies and we just weren't happy with the product. And I really trusted that Education Elements would help us create a quality product in a living document, which is exactly what they did. So we just built that in. When we talked with our strategic planning committee, which again, anybody can join. We had kids, we had parents, we had community members, staff members. Our first pillar was safe space. Well, if you're talking about inclusive practices, how can you have an Indian mascot? Because we have Native American students in our district. So that's not an inclusive practice as far as I was concerned. So when I spoke with Baltazar about it, I said, is there any way I think we can just work this in so it'll be under safe space is something we need to do? And he says, yeah, he says, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think we can go with it. So it really was about Education Elements then helping with that lift. Because as a superintendent in any district, but especially in the small district, like we wear lots of hats. So I cannot put the time, effort, and energy into the presentations, the process, the design process that Education Elements uses is second to none as far as I'm concerned. And every single time we went through that design process, no matter what the project was, we always got great results. So to be able to have somebody, you know, like a professional group doing those presentations and putting together the design process for a strategic action plan committee and also then for the mascot committee was just very helpful and a huge time saver for me. And it allowed me to push my thinking against Baltazar's or against Dana's to say, do you think we're at, like, are we going in the right direction to just have a partner to discuss this with who wasn't in Waterloo? So that for me, it was like I needed outside perspective because the perspective inside is emotional. And so how do you move through that emotion and make sure that you're, I guess, doing the right thing for lack of a better term? And Education Elements was just a great partner for that, from the strategic planning all the way through to the mascot. They helped us with the surveys. Like, I don't want anybody to think like I take no credit for that because Education Elements said, here, what do you think? And I said, perfect. They did the slide presentations for the mascot committees. They helped with the final presentation with the Board of Education, which was really completely kids. And we just kind of ran it by Education Elements. So it was just really helpful. Dana Britt has just got this really neat perspective on pretty much anything you talk with her about. And she was a helpful guiding hand through that entire process. So I don't know if our process would have gone as smoothly, but I don't think we could have got it done as quickly if I didn't have that help, because in the midst of COVID and all the things that superintendents had to do with reopening plans and mask mandates and all this other crazy stuff that was going on, I wouldn't have had the time. And we frankly would have run out of time against the mandate end of 2024.
Thanks, Terri. Thanks for sharing it and just naming that, you know, a partner in this work, whether it's Ed Elements or another organization, is critical, especially when we think about the change management Gabby was sharing in terms of pitfalls of being a part of the community and having to make those decisions, and then also having to be thoughtful about how you bring people together can be difficult. So it's having a partner in this work is really, really important. Want to give everyone a moment if there's any other questions, knowing that Terri is here right now live, and we want to be able to leverage her voice to answer any other questions, knowing she has lived and breathed this process so far. But any other questions that you're seeing, or Gabby, you see from the group right now?
I'm not seeing this in the chat, but I'm wondering if this might be a question people are having, especially with the question around, do you have sample surveys you can send? Terri, were there any other strategies to like create a platform for people to give input or feedback beyond a survey that you either did give, whether it was like a town hall or some kind of like open community night, or that you wish you would have given? Or do you feel like for at least your community context, the size, all of that, the surveys were sufficient to collect that input?
I think honestly for us with COVID, we really couldn't do a town hall. We were still restricted in how many people we could bring in and where you could seat people and all that. So honestly, I think it was better to not be in person, because it took the emotion a lot of times out of, that kind of angry, I don't know, grinding of, we don't want to change our mascot kind of a thing. Doing it online made it easier. And a survey is a non-emotional tool. So, people still put their comments in, and we obviously allowed that. But I think the other thing was, once we made the decision, quickly flipping to the rebranding was really important, because when people saw how excited the kids were, everybody got a t-shirt, everybody got a water bottle. We bought all the costumes. They were on, we had kids in the costumes on television. They were there for opening day for staff, and then for all the kids. And, the kids, talking with the kids about, well, the kids picked the image. The kids picked our logo, and we had a local person develop our logo. That was big. That, Kirsten DeCory, who's our softball coach, and the company that she works with, is the one who did all of our work. We had thousands of stickers printed. We gave those out at homecoming. We gave out Waterloo Tigers, the image that you saw in the PowerPoint, yard signs, gave those out for free at homecoming. So we just tried to plaster the community with the new image, and the kids love it. And it's nice at the primary building that they can be the Cubs. They have a different mascot, and it's cute. And they named him Louie, like, they had a naming contest. So just all that fun stuff that you can kind of rally around that's positive, I think was really helpful.
Thanks, Terri, for sharing. We should have had you dress up in the tiger outfit now that you're talking about it. I know, we've seen you on Twitter. we would have really been living this out. With that, I know on a more serious note, there was a question in the chat just around the Board of Education, and was it anonymous when it came to the final decision? And if not, did it require any specific post-decision management strategies that you want to share with this group, as much as you can share?
Well, if you look at our board minutes, it was not a unanimous decision. There was a lot of conversation at the board table, an open session. And I think our board members were under a lot of pressure. I mean, it was a big deal in the community, and these are elected positions. So, it was hard on people. It was hard on our board members. They live here. They've gone to school here. So I didn't underestimate how difficult that would be, which is why the strategic plan was so helpful, because it was like, that was a decision that was made by a committee, not by the Board of Education. They approved it. And I think the same thing with everything that we went through in the change. It wasn't just a board, weighing in on it. It was, really trying to be supportive of the community and the community's will. And in the end, that's what carried it. The other thing, again, since I don't know if people followed the Cambridge decision, but one of the things that I tried to explain to our Board of Education is, once you approve that strategic plan, this has to happen. Because if we try to flip back now and say, well, we're not gonna change our mascot, I'm pretty sure the commissioner is going to have something to say about that. So, I mean, I kept sort of reminding them of that message, that this is not going well in Cambridge. And then they appealed it right in the middle of when we were going through all this. So, there was a loud voice of, well, maybe we shouldn't change yet. Maybe we should wait. And I kept going back to how expensive the turf was going to be to fix. So in the end, I think, those were the things that helped people make their decision. Yeah. The Board of Ed did choose between the final four. They wanted to make the decision on the Final Four, but ultimately what they did was the Tigers was the clear winner. And then Wolves and Wolverines were close second and third. And then Bears, Samuel Bear actually was the founder of Waterloo. So Bears was another one. But the board did go with the community choice. But that took 2 votes to get there. So it was a very interesting process to watch.
Thanks, Terri, for sharing. It also just sounds like you were, through the process, thoughtful about the time that was going to be needed and creating those critical moments for people to have to engage, whether it was, being thoughtful about, we want to celebrate this and use the fall as the rebranding piece. I do think that those are things that oftentimes are overlooked when we're trying to get a job done, but really, how do we celebrate this when this work is launched too? Before we get off the line, Gabby and I, thank you, Terri, for sharing your story. I know that you're probably going to have a ton of people reaching out just to hear a little bit more. We're excited to be partners and seeing the work that's happened so far, but wanted to at least share where this work came into play as Terri went through this process. So as we support districts, there's different options in terms of how they want to invest in this process. So you'll notice Terri talked about this a little bit around, there was a clear process where she was able to backwards map when this work was going to get done. And so if you think about our phases of work from plan and align to launch, really thinking about when is this going to be critical for your community. So in the beginning, thinking about how are we going to listen and build that community input alongside us. For Terri, that was inviting everyone to the table and giving them the space to be a part of that conversation. As you heard from her, there were multiple survey rounds that allowed her then in the foundation's work to really think through what is the vision and how does that align to the historical context of the community also, right? Honoring that pride that has been left behind, even just through the legacy that's been there, but also knowing that students are the future. And so what do they want through that process? As we get into the launch phase of the work, that is where, as we talked about, like that Final Four, we're narrowing down the choices and thinking through what are those rebranding options and how we might bring that to the table and allow people to come back and cast their vote of what that might look like. And then, as Terri shared, continuing to update the board. So as we get into that launch phase, as we work with district partners, that is really where we're helping to support them to think through how are we going to launch this new mascot and bring awareness and excitement to the community, knowing that this is a pivotal time for so many communities as they bring forth this. So for Terri, it was the costumes, it was using the fall as a way to really bring people to the conversation, but leveraging that the months prior to that to really engage in in-depth conversations that were going to lead them to a change that was going to be impactful in the end. So if you're curious to learn more about how we can help you with this, this is the phases of work that we've helped Terri and others go through with that work.
Finally, we'll skip forward a couple slides. We do have a partner organization that I think some of you are familiar with, PLC Associates, and they do a lot of strategy work with districts who are on the state accountability list. And so not necessarily related to the mascot change, but if you do find yourself on the accountability list and you're curious about how they've helped districts write their SEP plans or DSIP plans, there is also a webinar happening this Thursday, and you can sign up. We'll put the bit.ly directly into the chat. You can register for that as well and learn more about potential resources or support that might be helpful to you too. Okay, so basically, if you want to hang out with us Thursday morning, there's a lot of ways to do that. Finally, Terri, I can't thank you enough. Kelly and I had an idea for what this webinar was going to be, and then as we heard more and more of Terri sharing her story, we're like, let's scrap all that and just really center Waterloo, because that just felt so much more powerful and meaningful than anything we could have shared. So we would love to hear what's resonating with you all as well. If you can just share one new idea that you're leaving with, either from Terri's story, from thinking about change management frameworks in the chat, or one way you anticipate needing support, we're going to leave the Zoom open for about 1 more minute while you check out in the chat. But thanks for joining us, Terri. Thank you again. And we hope to see you all in a future webinar.